the cocoon is cracked. So it is clear that now there's no way back. You have made this clear choice, this clear step to move from ego to soul, to move from mind to heart. And now you are stepping into that reality with a much greater degree of identification placed in your soul, in who you are here now, in the direct contact with life. So once we have struggled sufficiently, we, let's say, make a specific jump, which in the tantric tradition is considered the actual first step on the spiritual path, which is the awakening of the soul. So when we are describing, let's say, all the way from the devotee through the disciple, through the adept, and then all the way into the initiate, which we will talk about today as well. All of these stages are very much signified by degrees of awakening of the soul and how much our being is settled into the soul. At the stage of the disciple, you have this sort of showdown between the ego and the soul. This is where you make the actual decision that you do want to step forward. And then as you step forward out of the shadows of the ego into the light of the soul, the next stage that you reach to is the stage of the adept. To remain with the wonderful example that we had, the plant example and butterfly example, as you can see in the spreads, the sprout comes out from the earth. In the butterfly example, the cocoon is cracked. So it is clear that now there's no way back. You have made this clear choice, this clear step to move from ego to soul, to move from mind to heart. And now you are stepping into that reality with a much greater degree of identification placed in your soul, in who you are here now, in the direct contact with life, rather than the distortions of mind and ego that are more based on the past and the future, the, let's say, judgment of things as good and evil, as pleasurable or not pleasurable, and so forth. Beings at this level have a very clear radiance and capacity to them. They carry a personality that is beyond the ordinary. They are no longer comparable to the average citizen, even the average spiritual citizen, but they are those disciples, for example, within the flock of a master that will stand out. Of course, those might in some cases also be higher than the adept, but for sure these are the ones that will already carry a very specific spark of awakening, a spark of understanding. You can feel in them that they have tasted from the same well as the master. And again, we don't want to put people, masters, disciples, spiritual seekers and so forth into very clearly categorized boxes. That's not so much the idea. We don't want you to use this as sometimes astrology is misused to just stick people into a box and keep them there, but much rather to understand the path as a flowing analog, if you will, passing of understanding, shifting of consciousness, which then we aim to categorize in order to understand sort of, you know, what kind of sequence can we sort of relate to, so we know a bit what is going on the path. one example of the possibly an adept, very likely an adept, is one of the students of Gurdjieff, Uspensky, who actually is the one that published quite a bunch of Gurdjieff's teachings within his books. And if you listen, for example, to his explorations of Gurdjieff's teachings, very often this special disciple has even this capacity to understand the master in a way that is digestible also for other disciples around that are maybe not yet understanding as deeply. They are sometimes even the bridge towards either a fully enlightened master, a fully liberated master, or at least an initiate with great capacities. The risk for such a being is, as much as they can do amazing things for the world, bring spiritual knowledge, write books, make the teachings digestible, become great teachers themselves, and so forth, they might become proud within that. If you think how it is, if maybe you have even the experience of having a spiritual master or at least a spiritual teacher yourself, and to know how it is to get more recognized than other people by your spiritual teacher, and what that does to the ego structure, how it nourishes the ego, how it brings out all sorts of distortions, then you can maybe relate to how it is when you become one of the chosen ones, one of the 12 apostles, one of the great ones that has been recognized in front of everybody else, one that made at least a huge leap from ego to soul, that has special capacities, that is an example of the path, that becomes a living example of the teachings of the master, and so forth. The risk to become proud is very high. And this might look very different for different people. Now, one thing is you get proud. From that, you do have a risk to fall back into all sorts of distortions at the lower level of the being. But the adept, as they already gain a lot of spiritual power, occult power, have this risk of having an idea that they are even greater than the master. Or if not greater than the master, at least they start to see the master in a weird light, and they start to doubt the somehow the very source that has nurtured them, and then eventually will leave the master. This is quite a common theme. This syndrome of the great student that then falls because cannot return to the humbleness of just being a student, to the humbleness of receiving the teachings all the way to the end, but getting stuck somewhere because now you feel great and you feel you had your Kundalini awaken in this way, and you had a feeling of a state of silence for a few days, maybe for a few months. You had you reached an amazing control over certain aspects within your being and so forth. And all of a sudden, the person who taught you becomes distorted in your viewpoint. In this way, it is a bit like you cut a big branch from a tree, which then such disciple might leave and even bring along a bunch of students, and might even look as if they are establishing a whole nother spiritual school. But if it is not integrated with the fullness of awakening of the student, which at the stage of the adept we are starting with that, but it is not yet fully accomplished, then that big branch of the tree, it will still grow for some time. It will even sprout a little. It will even have some flowers on it and something. But it cannot compare itself to the tree. And even in time will lose its power as it is disconnected from the tree. So in this pride, the adept will, if they fall prey to this temptation, will simply get stuck and stop growing. By the way, this is a principle that even if you are not yet at this high level, where this is a much bigger temptation, you might have been facing this already in your normal stages of development, or normal is maybe a stupid word, but wherever you are at in your development, which might not yet be in the awakening of the soul. But you might have noticed how with each bigger spiritual accomplishment, with each speeding up process, whatever doubts and misunderstandings and distortions might still be alive in your heart, you might get this illusion of being somehow much greater than you actually are, which is one of the big falling points in the New Age movement, is exactly this. You have one Kundalini rising and then you write books about it for the rest of your life and completely forget what this Kundalini rising was meant to exemplify for you in order to move forward. So this is in general a thing to understand, that along the path you will be tested. And these tests, they come along with great spiritual accomplishments. When you make a big leap, you will be tested for sure. When you make a big leap, therefore, make it your first and foremost interest to repeat the states that you are currently experiencing, to systematize the practice around them, to become even better than that, even more humble, even more wonderful, even more balanced, and so on and so forth. There's always more to learn. And this temptation is one of the first things to overcome if you want to really make leaps on the spiritual path. A real adept puts all his time into the spiritual practice, or her time into the spiritual practice. As the soul is already awakened at this level, everything in life becomes practice. This is when yoga shifts from being something that you do on your yoga mat to something that you do all the time. This is when, referring back to the subject of last week, the erotic experience, one of the great godly attributes, moves from being only experienced in some sort of romantic connection in the bedroom to being experienced all the time with everything. When the humbleness is not just experienced in front of the teacher, but is experienced in front of all creation all the time. So when the being starts to practice all aspects, all methodologies, all the time throughout the day, that is quite clearly that we are talking about an adept, which will then shift very soon also into being an initiate, which is the next level to be accomplished. Hey guys, if you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more content on spirituality, Tantra and more.
And if you want to sign up for our online classes or for our retreats, you can see our website on the description below.
Thank you.